Here's a brief history lesson. Back in the day, Melee used random from a list of stages they called neutrals. This included Yoshi's Story, Battlefield, Final Destination, Dreamland 64, and Fountain of Dreams. Anyone who has played Melee seriously knows neutral is a misnomer. Using random caused a lot of problems. Captain Falcon players would randomly get Fountain of Dreams for the first game of their set, while Jigglypuff could get Dreamland. Entire sets would start with one player at a distinct advantage. Many felt that it wasn't an issue at all. After all, bans were done before Game 1 in those days, and you could just ban Dreamland against Jigglypuff players or ban Fountain of Dreams if you played Captain Falcon. This unfortunately left players with a forced ban, leaving them wide open for counterpicks of their opponent's choosing. It was a flawed system that encouraged the use of characters that could more routinely benefit from a randomized stage. This was a problem that was brought up during the life of the game, but no real push for a solution was made. When Brawl was released, we were suddenly confronted with a new game and many more stages. The instinctual response was to pick stages that were flat with no hazards and call them neutrals, then randomly select from that list. After all, that's what Melee had done, and Melee worked out pretty well. Unfortunately, the Brawl stages that had the Battlefield-style layout were nearly synonymous in size. These stages didn't have the same effect, and more importantly, the game had changed. Not every character excelled on these static, flat stages with platforms. They preferred stages with more dynamic components like Delfino's moving stage, Halberd and Castle Siege's transformations, and Smashville's moving platform. How do you decide which stages to use? If you limit your stage list to one type of stage, you're automatically giving advantages to one type of character. But if you use both sets of stages, you'll randomly give an advantage that could arbitrarily determine the set. The West Coast and Midwest simultaneously discovered a solution in something called stage striking. Now being used virtually everywhere, stage striking is where you have a list of stages and you take turns removing stages from that list until you both end up with a stage you should be okay with. No one should get an advantage or disadvantage. These stages aren't neutrals, they're starters. The name change is important as it illustrates our knowledge that none of these stages are fair in all matchups. Smash 4 is now released and stage lists are starting to take shape. But many new players don't know the origins of stage striking and don't understand the complexities involved. I've seen requests to remove stages like Halberd or Lylat or Skyloft from the starter list, as often as I've seen requests for starter lists to just be the flat static stages with platforms. I've seen requests on the opposite end that say all stages should be on the stage striking list. These requests all come from a basic misunderstanding in why stage striking exists and how carefully it needs to be administered. The important thing to remember is that our goal isn't to make a pretty-looking starter list. It's to ensure that in all matchups, the final stage chosen is one that both players are comfortable with. It doesn't matter if we have a stage on a starter list that no one ever plays on, as long as it helps get us that perfect stage. To help paint a picture, let's use a simplified example. Let's say you have characters 1, 2, and 3, and a whole bunch of stages that fit neatly into types A, B, and C. Character 1 likes stage A, but is okay with B and C. Character 2 likes stage B, but is okay with C and A. And character 3 likes stage types of version C, but is okay with A and B. We now have a triangle of sorts. There's no one obvious stage that could be the starter, as it'd give a character an advantage, and we don't want that. So we have to stage strike. If we have 9 starters, with 3 of stage types A, B, and C, each player will strike 4 stages. There's no way anyone will allow their opponent to get a stage that they prefer. It will be guaranteed a proper starting stage in all situations. As wonderful as stage striking is, it has a glaring weakness in that optimal stage striking always ends on the same stage each time. That means if something goes wrong, and you strike down to a stage that gives you a disadvantage, you'll likely get that stage every time. Starter lists have to be looked at closely and updated over time to ensure that the metagame isn't being influenced by what stages are on the starter lists. Imagine a starter list with 7 final destinations. That's why good starter lists typically have a higher number, like 7 or 9 stages. Starter lists with only 3 or 5 stages often give guaranteed advantages to certain characters. Stages still need to be chosen carefully to get that optimal result, but a higher number of stages often helps the process. A lot of people balk at some stages being on a starter list due to various properties, such as it's too big, or it has a hazard, or other arbitrary things like that. These people don't understand why we use stage striking. The point is to end up on a stage that gives neither party an advantage. Hopefully this clears things up for newer Smash 4 players and helps new tournament organizers create better stage lists. Just remember, the point is to end up on a stage that gives neither party an advantage. It doesn't necessarily mean both players will like the stage. It just means that neither of them have an advantage.